What do you think of when you hear the name Ottoman Empire? Grand palaces? Powerful sultans? The shimmering crossroads of East and West? For centuries, this empire ruled vast lands, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the deserts of Arabia, and from the Balkans to the heart of Africa. But what's the untold story behind its rise, its cultural achievements, and ultimately its fall? And how did the once mighty Ottoman Empire give birth to the modern nation-state of Turkey? In this documentary, we're peeling back the layers of history to uncover the empire's secrets, the transformations it endured, and the legacy that still shapes the world today. From the legendary reign of Suleiman the Magnificent to the visionary reforms of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, this is the untold story of the Ottoman Empire like you've never heard before. This is the journey from empire to republic. This is the untold story of the Ottoman Empire. The rise of the Ottoman Empire. The story of the Ottoman Empire begins long before its grand expansion into Europe, Asia, and Africa. It begins in the late 13th century, in a time when the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum had already begun to fragment, leaving a vacuum of power in Anatolia. A small Turkic tribe, the Kei, led by Osman I, would soon rise to fill this gap and lay the foundations for what would become one of the most powerful and influential empires in world history. The early years, Osman I and the birth of an empire. In the late 1200s, the Byzantine Empire, once a proud and mighty civilization, was crumbling under the weight of external invasions and internal disunity. The Mongols had swept through the region, ravaging much of the Middle East, and now the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self, holding on to little more than the city of Constantinople. The weakening of the Byzantine Empire left the Anatolian heartland open for conquest by various Turkic groups, most notably the Seljuk Turks and the growing Ottoman force. It is in this chaotic period that Osman I emerges. According to most historical accounts, Osman I was born around 1258 in the town of Sagat, located in present-day Turkey. He inherited leadership of the Kei tribe from his father, Ertugrul, and was initially a small-time chieftain with relatively modest ambitions. However, Osman, like many other leaders of his time, was not content with merely defending his people. He dreamed of a much larger, more influential future. Osman's early victories were crucial in cementing his status as a leader of not just his tribe but the growing Turkic forces in the region. His first major success came in 1299 when he declared independence from the Seljuk Sultanate and laid the foundation for what would eventually become the Ottoman Empire. Osman's military campaigns were particularly focused on weakening the Byzantine hold on Anatolia, making the collapse of the Byzantine Empire one of the key contributing factors to the rise of the Ottomans. What made Osman's leadership so effective was not just his military prowess, but also his ability to form alliances with local Christian communities, as well as his strategic marriages. By aligning himself with the local Byzantine nobles, Osman was able to build a network of supporters within the Byzantine territory, further expanding his influence. It was a mix of military conquest and diplomacy that would define the early years of the Ottoman Empire. The legacy of Osman I. Osman I ruled until his death in 1326, and in his lifetime, he had laid the groundwork for a powerful empire. His son, Orhan, would succeed him and continue his father's legacy of expansion, but it was Osman's strategic vision and pioneering spirit that would remain the defining features of the early Ottoman Empire. The name Ottoman itself comes from Osman. In Turkish, the empire is known as Osmanlı İmparatorluğu, meaning Empire of Osman, a tribute to its founder's role in creating a state that would last for over 600 years. But the story of the rise of the Ottomans is not just about military victories. It's also about the way the early Ottomans managed to integrate the various cultures, religions, and ethnicities of the lands they conquered. Unlike many of the empires that came before them, the Ottomans had a unique approach to governance. They did not impose a single, rigid system on their subjects. Instead, they allowed a degree of autonomy to local rulers, especially in the early years, as long as they pledged allegiance to the Ottoman Sultan. This tolerance toward diversity was crucial in the formation of the Ottoman Empire, allowing it to expand into a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire that spanned continents. The flexibility and pragmatism in the way the Ottomans managed their empire especially in the early years, would later be key to their success in maintaining control over vast and diverse territories. The conquest of Constantinople. By the time of Osman's descendants, the Ottomans were poised for their greatest achievement, the conquest of Constantinople. The city had long been the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, the crossroads between East and West, and it had withstood countless sieges over the centuries. But by the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire had all but collapsed, and the Ottomans were ready to seize the opportunity. It was under the rule of Sultan Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, that the Ottomans would take the final step toward becoming a world empire. Mehmed ascended to the throne in 1444, and after a series of military campaigns in the Balkans and Anatolia, he turned his attention to the Byzantine capital. Constantinople was an ancient and legendary city, and its conquest would forever change the course of history. Mehmed's siege of Constantinople in 1453 was a defining moment in both Ottoman and world history. The city had long been surrounded by massive walls, and the Ottomans would need to overcome these formidable defenses in order to succeed. To do so, Mehmed employed cutting-edge military technology, most famously using massive cannons that could smash through the walls. The siege lasted for several months, and the defenders, led by the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaeologus, fought valiantly to protect their city. Despite their best efforts, the Byzantines were no match for the relentless Ottoman forces. On May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell. The Byzantine Empire ceased to exist, and the Ottomans had gained control of one of the most important cities in the world. This was a monumental turning point in world history. For the Ottomans, the conquest of Constantinople was more than just a military victory. It marked the moment when they transformed from a regional power into a global empire. The city, which would now be known as Istanbul, would become the heart of the Ottoman Empire and serve as its capital for centuries to come. The conquest of Constantinople also had far-reaching implications for Europe and the rest of the world. The fall of the city marked the end of Christian rule in the East, and it effectively closed off one of the most important trade routes between Europe and Asia. In the years that followed, European powers would seek alternative routes to the East, leading to the Age of Exploration and the eventual discovery of the Americas. The rise of the Ottoman naval power. By the end of the 15th century, the Ottomans had firmly established themselves as a dominant power in both Europe and Asia. However, one of the key factors in the Ottoman Empire's ability to expand and maintain its power was its naval strength. The Ottomans had long been adept at managing trade routes, but under the reign of Mehmed II's successor, Sultan Selim I, the Ottomans would begin to build a powerful navy capable of projecting power far beyond their borders. Selim I's military campaigns in the early 16th century were focused primarily on the Middle East. He defeated the Mamluks of Egypt in 1517, incorporating Egypt and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina into the Ottoman Empire. But it was during the reign of Selim's son, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, that the Ottoman navy would truly come into its own. Suleiman, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, is often remembered for his military conquests and legal reforms, but his naval campaigns were equally significant. Under his command, the Ottomans extended their naval power into the Mediterranean, North Africa, and beyond. Suleiman's fleet became one of the most formidable in the world, and it helped to solidify Ottoman dominance in the Mediterranean for centuries. The Ottomans' control over key maritime routes allowed them to control much of the trade between Europe, Africa, and Asia, further strengthening their position as a global power. The Ottoman Navy would go on to play a crucial role in their ability to maintain a vast and sprawling empire that stretched from the Balkans to North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. The Golden Age of the Ottoman Empire. As we continue the story of the Ottoman Empire, we shift focus to the era after the conquest of Constantinople, a time when the Ottomans would reach the peak of their power. This period, known as the Golden Age of the Ottoman Empire, spanned the 16th and early 17th centuries, under the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent and his successors. By this time, the Ottoman Empire had grown from a small tribal state into a sprawling empire that stretched across 3 continents, encompassing the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman I, often called Suleiman the Magnificent, became the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in 1520, following the death of his father, Selim I. His reign marked the height of the Ottoman Empire's political, military, and cultural power. Suleiman was not only a brilliant military leader but also a skilled administrator, a patron of the arts, and a lawgiver who left a lasting impact on Ottoman governance. Suleiman's early military campaigns further expanded the empire's borders, with notable victories in Europe and the Middle East. He turned his attention to Hungary, successfully conquering large parts of it, including the critical city of Buda, which would remain under Ottoman control for over 150 years. But perhaps his most famous military campaign was against the Safavid Empire in Persia, where his forces captured key territories in Iraq, marking the Ottomans as the dominant power in the region. In addition to military prowess, Suleiman sought to solidify his empire by modernizing its legal system. He instituted sweeping reforms to Ottoman law, organizing the legal structure into a more coherent and accessible system. These reforms earned him the title Kanuni, the lawgiver, in the Ottoman world. Suleiman's legal code addressed a wide range of issues, from civil disputes to criminal law, and laid the foundations for how the empire would be governed for centuries. While Suleiman was busy expanding the empire, his rule also coincided with the blossoming of Ottoman culture. Istanbul became a thriving center of art, literature, and architecture, with numerous buildings and landmarks erected during this period that are still admired today. The Süleymanî Mosque, one of the most iconic structures in Istanbul, was completed under his reign and remains a symbol of the empire's grandeur. However, Suleiman's empire was not solely built on military success and legal reform. His court also became a cultural hub, attracting scholars, poets, and artisans from across the Islamic world and beyond. Under his patronage, the Ottoman Empire became a cultural bridge between Europe and Asia, with influences from both continents contributing to the empire's unique style in art, architecture, and literature. The expansion into the Mediterranean and North Africa. Suleiman's reign also saw the Ottomans become the undisputed naval power of the Mediterranean. While the Ottomans had already begun building a formidable navy under his predecessors, it was under Suleiman that the empire truly asserted its dominance over the seas. His naval campaigns were spearheaded by the famous admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa, who had defected from the Spanish side and joined the Ottomans in 1512. Barbarossa's leadership transformed the Ottoman fleet into a force to be reckoned with. The Ottomans secured key naval victories, including the Battle of Preveza in 1538, which solidified Ottoman control over the Mediterranean and kept European maritime powers at bay. Under Suleiman and Barbarossa, the Ottoman navy expanded into the Western Mediterranean, securing control of vital trade routes and increasing Ottoman influence over North Africa, where the empire established control over key cities such as Algiers, Tripoli, and Tunis. The Ottomans' dominance of the Mediterranean allowed them to not only control trade but also spread their cultural and political influence across the region. By the mid-16th century, the Ottoman fleet was one of the most formidable in the world, able to challenge the naval power of Spain and Venice, two of Europe's leading maritime states. This expansion was not limited to military conquests. The Ottomans continued to build upon the empire's diverse society, ensuring that different cultures, religions, and traditions thrived under their rule. The Ottomans employed a system known as the millet system, which allowed religious communities within the empire, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim alike, to govern themselves according to their own laws. This system of autonomy was a hallmark of Ottoman rule, promoting coexistence among a multitude of groups that lived within the empire's borders. The safeguarding of the Ottoman economy. By the mid-1500s, the Ottoman Empire had established itself as a key player on the global stage, but it was not only military victories and cultural achievements that ensured its continued prosperity. The Ottomans were also adept at controlling trade routes, particularly those between Europe and Asia. Their position allowed them to dominate the flow of goods between the East and West, controlling important land and sea routes. Under Suleiman, the empire maintained a strong central bureaucracy that ensured the smooth functioning of trade. The Ottomans also made significant investments in infrastructure, building roads, bridges, and caravanserais, inns for travelers and traders, which facilitated the movement of goods and people across their vast territories. This infrastructure supported not just the economy but also the cultural exchange between different regions of the empire. The Ottomans benefited greatly from their control of the Silk Road and spice trade, becoming middlemen in a vast international network that linked Asia to Europe. Trade cities like Istanbul, Cairo, and Aleppo flourished as bustling hubs of commerce, attracting traders from across the globe. These economic advantages contributed significantly to the empire's wealth, allowing it to fund both military campaigns and cultural endeavors. However, by the mid-17th century, the Ottoman Empire began to face economic challenges. While trade continued to flow through Ottoman territories, European powers started to seek alternative trade routes that bypassed the Ottomans. The rise of Atlantic trade and the opening of sea routes to the Americas and Asia slowly shifted the global economic balance, reducing the empire's position as the central hub of global commerce. The challenges of managing a vast empire. Despite its prosperity, the Ottoman Empire faced growing challenges in the 17th century. The empire's size, spanning 3 continents and countless cultures, became increasingly difficult to govern effectively. The decentralized nature of the Ottoman system, in which local rulers and military leaders held considerable power, began to create fractures in the empire's unity. Additionally, the influx of wealth from trade and conquests led to internal corruption and inefficiency. By the end of the 16th century, the empire's military, once its greatest strength, began to experience difficulties. The Janissaries, the elite military corps that had been so vital to the Ottoman success, began to grow complacent, increasingly resistant to reforms and innovations. The Ottomans had long relied on their military to expand their empire, but as the Janissaries became less effective, the Ottomans found it harder to maintain their dominance over their territories. Meanwhile, the empire's political structure also began to show signs of strain. Succession disputes, palace intrigues, and the weakening of central authority contributed to a growing sense of instability. While the empire was still vast and powerful, the seeds of decline had been sown. Yet, the golden age of the Ottomans would continue for several more decades, and it was during this time that the empire would see one of its greatest rulers, Suleiman the Magnificent, whose legacy would endure long after his death. The decline and transformation of the Ottoman Empire. While the Ottoman Empire's golden age flourished under Suleiman and his immediate successors, the following centuries would reveal a more complex and challenging future. The empire's decline was neither sudden nor uniform. Rather, it was a slow unraveling, an erosion from within, fueled by internal strife, external pressures, and the changing geopolitical landscape. The rise of the sick man of Europe. By the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire had reached its territorial peak, but it was beginning to face critical internal challenges. The empire's vast size, combined with its complex multi-ethnic, multi-religious structure, made it increasingly difficult to govern effectively. The power of local provincial governors began to rise at the expense of the central authority, weakening the Sultan's control over the empire. The Janissaries, once the backbone of the Ottoman military, began to lose their discipline and effectiveness. They had grown resistant to reforms and increasingly involved themselves in political life, undermining the very system that had made the empire powerful. At the same time, economic changes were taking place that reduced the Ottoman Empire's position as a central player in global trade. The discovery of new sea routes by European explorers to Africa, Asia, and the Americas shifted the flow of wealth away from the land-based trade routes that had once enriched the Ottomans. Moreover, the rise of powerful European nation-states, such as Britain, France, and Russia, further eroded the Ottomans' influence. These nations began to chip away at the empire's territories, each seeking to expand their own influence at the expense of the Ottomans. Russia, in particular, became a serious rival to the Ottomans, engaging in a series of wars over the course of the 18th and 19th centuries that further drained Ottoman resources. By the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had earned the nickname the Sick Man of Europe. While still holding large territories, its inability to keep up with the technological, military, and economic advancements of Europe signaled that the empire was in a period of significant decline. The once great empire, which had been at the center of global power, was now a shell of its former self, plagued by corruption, internal divisions, and the relentless pressures from external forces. The age of reforms, the Tanzimat era. Recognizing the looming threat of collapse, the Ottoman leadership attempted a series of reforms throughout the 19th century. The Tanzimat reforms, which began in the 1830s under Sultan Mahmud II and continued under his successors, were aimed at modernizing the empire in order to maintain its relevance. These reforms included the establishment of new legal codes, a reorganization of the military, and the introduction of new schools and infrastructure projects. Sultan Mahmud II played a pivotal role in weakening the power of the Janissaries. In 1826, after the Janissaries staged a rebellion, Mahmud took decisive action by having thousands of them executed and disbanding the corps. This marked a significant turning point in Ottoman military and political history. Mahmud's reforms extended beyond the military. He also sought to centralize power and implement a more modernized system of governance. However, these changes were met with resistance from both conservative factions and local elites, leading to unrest and discontent. After Mahmud's death in 1839, the Tanzimat reforms continued under his successors, notably Sultan Abdulmecid I, who oversaw the issuance of the Had-i Sharif of Gulhane in 1839. This decree promised a new era of reform and modernization, guaranteeing equality for all subjects of the empire, regardless of religion or ethnicity. The Tanzimat era sought to reconcile the empire's traditional Islamic structure with the demands of modernization, incorporating European-inspired legal and administrative reforms. These reforms also sought to improve the economy, streamline tax collection, and reduce the corruption that had plagued the empire for centuries. However, despite these ambitious reforms, the Ottoman Empire remained a patchwork of contradictory forces. While urban elites in Istanbul were often enthusiastic about Western-style reforms, many rural and provincial regions clung to traditional systems of governance. The tensions between modernity and tradition would continue to shape the empire's history throughout the 19th century. The Balkans and nationalism, the loss of territory. One of the most significant challenges the Ottoman Empire faced in the 19th century was the rise of nationalism in the Balkans. Long under Ottoman rule, the various ethnic groups in the Balkans began to demand independence and self-determination. The decline of Ottoman power provided the perfect opportunity for nationalist movements to take root and gain momentum. Serbia was the first to break away from Ottoman rule in the early 19th century. By 1830, after a series of uprisings and military confrontations, the Ottomans were forced to grant Serbia autonomy. Other Balkan states soon followed suit, with Greece achieving independence after the Greek War of Independence, 1821 to 1830. The Ottomans struggled to maintain control over their European territories, facing both internal revolts and external pressures from European powers that saw the weakening of the Ottomans as an opportunity to expand their influence in the region. The Russian Empire, in particular, began to play an increasing role in the Balkans, positioning itself as the protector of Slavic Christians under Ottoman rule. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, was a direct result of these tensions, with the Ottoman Empire, backed by Britain and France, fighting Russia to maintain its territorial integrity. While the Ottomans managed to repel the Russian invasion, the war weakened the empire further, and European powers began to carve out spheres of influence within Ottoman lands. The loss of territory in the Balkans was a major blow to Ottoman prestige. By the late 19th century, many of the empire's former European holdings had become independent nations. The rising tide of nationalism in the Balkans would continue to contribute to the empire's disintegration throughout the 20th century, culminating in the outbreak of World War I. The decline of the Ottoman military. As the 19th century wore on, the Ottoman military increasingly fell behind Europe in terms of modernization and capability. While European armies were advancing in tactics, technology, and organization, the Ottoman military retained many of its traditional methods. The failure to modernize the military effectively contributed to a series of defeats against both internal and external enemies. The Ottoman Navy, which had once been a formidable force under Suleiman the Magnificent, was also in decline. European powers had developed more advanced naval fleets, while the Ottomans struggled to maintain their naval strength. This technological gap would prove decisive in the loss of key battles and territories, as the Ottomans found it harder to project power beyond their borders. At the same time, the Ottomans began to rely more on European advisors and military experts to modernize their forces. While this brought some improvements, it also highlighted the empire's increasing dependence on foreign powers, which further eroded its sovereignty and independence. The Ottoman military, once the driving force behind the empire's expansion, now stood as a symbol of its weakening position in the world. The Young Turks and the final struggles. By the turn of the 20th century, a new generation of Ottoman reformers, known as the Young Turks, emerged, advocating for constitutional reforms and a more democratic system of government. The Young Turks overthrew Sultan Abdul Hamid II in 1909, establishing a constitutional monarchy and modernizing the empire's political system. However, their efforts to preserve the empire were undermined by the continuing pressures of nationalism, military defeats, and the rise of European imperialism. The Ottoman Empire's inability to adapt to the rapidly changing world left it vulnerable to collapse. World War I would mark the final chapter in the Ottoman saga, as the empire entered the war on the side of the Central Powers, only to face defeat and disintegration. The fall of the Ottoman Empire and the birth of modern Turkey. The First World War marked the final chapter in the long and storied history of the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the Ottomans had been a dominant power, but by the early 20th century, the empire had become an anachronism, unable to compete with the rapid modernization of Europe and the rise of new national movements within its own borders. The war that would bring about the empire's collapse was also the war that would give rise to the modern nation-state of Turkey, an entirely new entity forged from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans in World War I, a last stand. By the time World War I broke out in 1914, the Ottoman Empire had been in decline for over a century. Despite attempts at reform, it was still deeply mired in political corruption, social unrest, and military inefficiency. The empire's territorial holdings had been significantly reduced, especially in Europe, and its once powerful military was a shadow of its former self. The Ottomans entered World War I on the side of the Central Powers, which included Germany and Austria-Hungary, hoping that victory would help reverse their declining fortunes. However, the Ottomans were ill-prepared for the challenges of modern warfare, and their involvement in the conflict would only accelerate their decline. The Ottoman military faced a series of devastating defeats. In the Middle East, British forces, led by General T. Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia, orchestrated a successful campaign that saw the capture of Ottoman-controlled territories, including Egypt, Palestine, and much of the Arabian Peninsula. Meanwhile, in the Caucasus, the Ottomans were defeated by Russian forces, further eroding their position in the region. The most disastrous defeat, however, came at the Battle of Gallipoli in 1915. The Allies, primarily British and French forces, launched a failed naval and land campaign aimed at securing control of the Dardanelles and opening a new front against the Central Powers. Despite the Allies' overwhelming superiority, the Ottoman forces, under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who would later become the founder of the Republic of Turkey, managed to inflict a humiliating defeat on the invaders, securing their control over the strategic Gallipoli Peninsula. This victory was a moment of pride for the Ottoman Empire, but would ultimately prove to be one of the empire's final successes before its demise. By 1918, the war had taken its toll on the Ottomans. The Central Powers were defeated, and the empire's fate was sealed. The signing of the Armistice of Mudros on October 30, 1918, officially ended Ottoman participation in the war. The terms of the armistice were harsh. Ottoman forces were ordered to disarm, and Allied occupation of key Ottoman territories began. The partitioning of the empire. The aftermath of World War I saw the Ottoman Empire effectively disintegrating. The victors of the war, particularly the British and the French, were determined to divide the Ottoman lands among themselves through a series of secret agreements, most notably the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. This agreement carved up the Middle East into spheres of influence, with the British gaining control of Palestine, Iraq, and Transjordan, while the French took control of Syria and Lebanon. The partitioning of the Ottoman Empire sowed the seeds of conflict and instability in the region that continues to have repercussions to this day. In addition to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the Ottoman Empire was subjected to the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920, a punitive peace treaty that sought to dismantle the empire entirely. The treaty proposed the complete disintegration of the Ottoman state, with large portions of its territory either being ceded to Allied powers or becoming independent nations. The most significant territorial loss was Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, which was to be divided among Greece, Armenia, and various Kurdish regions, while the city of Istanbul was to be placed under international control. The treaty was an affront to Turkish national pride, and its terms were seen as humiliating by many. However, the Treaty of Sèvres would never be fully implemented. A resistance movement was already brewing in Anatolia, led by the ambitious and charismatic Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk. The discontent caused by the Treaty of Sèvres would ignite the Turkish War of Independence, a struggle that would ultimately lead to the birth of the modern Turkish Republic. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk and the birth of Turkey. Mustafa Kemal was a military officer who had risen to prominence during World War I, particularly for his role in the Gallipoli campaign. His leadership and vision would prove crucial in the Ottoman Empire's transition into the modern era. In 1919, following the signing of the Treaty of Sèvres, Mustafa Kemal began organizing resistance to the terms of the treaty and the foreign occupation of Anatolia. His efforts were largely based in the city of Sivas, where he began to rally the Turkish people against the occupying powers and the Ottoman government, which he saw as weak and incapable of defending Turkish sovereignty. The movement was initially political, with the goal of rejecting the Treaty of Sèvres and restoring Turkish independence. Kemal's political and military acumen, combined with his ability to unite a fragmented and demoralized country, allowed him to form a nationalist army that would eventually defeat both the Greek and Armenian forces occupying parts of Anatolia. This was the beginning of the Turkish War of Independence, 1919 to 1923, a campaign that saw Kemal's forces steadily push back foreign invaders and restore control over Anatolian territory. The war culminated in the establishment of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey in 1920, a new government that would serve as the foundation for the Republic of Turkey. In 1923, after a series of military victories, the Ottoman Sultanate was formally abolished, and the Republic of Turkey was declared on October 29, 1923, with Mustafa Kemal Ataturk as its first president. Ataturk's vision for the new republic was one of modernization, secularism, and national unity. His reforms included the introduction of a new civil code, the adoption of the Latin alphabet, and the establishment of secularism as a fundamental principle of the Turkish state. Ataturk's leadership transformed Turkey from a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire into a unified, modern nation-state. His reforms were not without controversy, but his legacy as the founder of modern Turkey is undeniable. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire. The fall of the Ottoman Empire marked the end of one of the most influential empires in world history, but its legacy continues to shape the modern world. The territorial divisions created by the empire, particularly in the Middle East, continue to influence the political and cultural landscape of the region today. Furthermore, the Ottoman Empire's cultural contributions, including its architectural achievements, art, literature, and culinary traditions, remain an integral part of the collective heritage of many countries. The empire's unique system of governance, which combined Islamic principles with a flexible, decentralized approach to ruling over diverse peoples, is still studied and admired for its pragmatism. The Ottoman Empire, though gone, continues to be remembered as a historical giant, one that spanned centuries, bridged continents, and influenced the course of global history in ways that are still felt today. The rise of modern Turkey, Ataturk's vision and legacy. The birth of the Republic of Turkey in 1923, under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, was nothing short of a revolutionary moment. The Ottoman Empire, a vast multicultural and multi-religious entity, had been replaced by a new, secular, and modern nation-state. Ataturk's vision was clear: to transform the remnants of the Ottoman Empire into a nation that embraced modernity, nationalism, and secularism. His reforms not only reshaped Turkey's political landscape but also impacted its society, economy, and cultural identity. Secularism and the reformation of religion. One of Ataturk's most significant and controversial reforms was the introduction of secularism into the Turkish state. Under the Ottoman Empire, Islam was the central institution around which the state was organized. The Sultan was both the political and religious leader, and the religious hierarchy had significant influence over the empire's laws and social structures. However, Ataturk recognized that in order for Turkey to modernize and become part of the international community, it needed to distance itself from theocratic governance and establish a secular republic. Ataturk's secular vision meant that religion would no longer play an official role in the government. In 1924, he abolished the caliphate, which had been a symbol of the unity of the Muslim world under Ottoman rule. This marked a decisive break from the centuries-old tradition of Ottoman political Islam. Ataturk also introduced sweeping reforms to separate religion from the state and public life. Religious schools were closed, and religious influence in the public sphere was significantly reduced. The presidency, for example, would not have any religious role, and the state would support only secular institutions. Religious practices also underwent reforms. Ataturk encouraged the use of the Turkish language in religious services, replacing the Arabic language prayers in mosques with Turkish ones. He sought to modernize Islam in Turkey, promoting a version that was compatible with the scientific and educational advances of the time. While many of these changes were welcomed by secular elites, they also sparked resistance among conservative segments of Turkish society, particularly those who viewed Islam as an integral part of their identity. Ataturk's reforms in religion were aimed not just at reducing the power of the clergy, but also at fostering a sense of Turkish nationalism that transcended religious divisions. The secularization of the state created a sense of unity among the Turkish people, regardless of their ethnic or religious backgrounds. It was a critical step in forging a national identity that could withstand the pressures of modernity and the influence of foreign powers. Language and education reform, a national identity. Ataturk's desire to create a unified, modern Turkish state also led to one of the most ambitious cultural reforms of the 20th century, the Turkish language reform. The Ottoman Turkish language, which was the official language of the empire, was a complex mixture of Turkish, Arabic, and Persian, making it difficult for the majority of the population to understand. Ataturk believed that simplifying and modernizing the Turkish language was essential for nation-building and for the empowerment of ordinary Turks. In 1928, Ataturk's government introduced the Latin alphabet to replace the Arabic script. This change was not merely a shift in writing style. It symbolized a break from the Ottoman past and an embrace of Western modernization. The new alphabet made the language more accessible, and it allowed for greater literacy rates across Turkey. Ataturk also launched a major effort to eliminate foreign words from the Turkish language and replace them with Turkish equivalents. This language reform was part of a broader effort to create a distinctive Turkish cultural identity that was both modern and rooted in the nation's history. Education was central to Ataturk's vision. In 1924, he implemented a new education system that replaced the religious schools of the Ottoman period with secular institutions. The new education system focused on science, mathematics, and modern Western knowledge. Ataturk encouraged the establishment of universities, and many of Turkey's current academic institutions were founded during this period. The goal was to create a well-educated and secular population that could contribute to Turkey's modernization. Ataturk also focused on empowering women through education. He believed that the future of Turkey depended on women's participation in all areas of society, including politics, economics, and culture. His reforms allowed women to attend universities, participate in the workforce, and eventually vote. In 1934, Turkey became one of the first countries in the world to grant women full suffrage, marking another landmark achievement in Ataturk's modernization efforts. The economy, from agrarian to industrial. Ataturk's vision for Turkey wasn't limited to cultural and political reforms. He also sought to transform Turkey's economy, which was largely agrarian and underdeveloped, into a modern industrial economy. He believed that a strong economy was the foundation for a powerful nation-state. The Turkish economy in the early years of the Republic was in a precarious state. The empire's collapse had left the country with a weak industrial base and extensive foreign debt. The country's infrastructure had been neglected during the final years of Ottoman rule, and there were few modern industries. Ataturk's solution was to implement a series of state-led economic reforms aimed at creating an industrial base for the country. Ataturk promoted policies of state control over key sectors of the economy. Large state enterprises were established in sectors such as textiles, cement, and steel. These state-run factories and businesses were intended to create jobs, reduce dependence on foreign imports, and modernize Turkey's industrial capabilities. His government also implemented major infrastructure projects, such as the construction of railroads, roads, and dams, which helped integrate the country's various regions and spurred economic growth. Ataturk's economic policies were inspired by European models of state-led development, but they also had a distinctly Turkish flavor. One of his most notable achievements was the creation of the Turkish Industrial Revolution, which laid the foundation for Turkey's industrialization in the decades that followed. While these policies helped stabilize the economy in the short term, they also placed a strain on state finances, and Turkey's reliance on state-led industrialization would eventually give way to more liberal economic policies in the post-Ataturk era. Ataturk's foreign policy, neutrality, and westernization. In addition to his domestic reforms, Ataturk also reshaped Turkey's foreign policy. After the tumultuous years of the Ottoman Empire's decline and the devastation of World War I, Ataturk sought to ensure that Turkey would remain neutral in global conflicts and avoid being drawn into the rivalries of Europe and the Middle East. His foreign policy was centered on the idea of peace at home, peace in the world, advocating for non-interventionism and peaceful diplomacy. Ataturk's foreign policy was guided by pragmatism. He sought to maintain good relations with both Western powers and neighboring countries. At the same time, he worked to ensure that Turkey would not become embroiled in the political and military entanglements that had led to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. He signed treaties with neighboring countries, including Greece, Armenia, and the Soviet Union, and he sought to modernize Turkey's military without making it a major player in international conflicts. Ataturk's commitment to secularism also extended to foreign relations. He wanted Turkey to be seen as a modern, secular nation-state, distinct from the religious conflicts that had plagued the Ottoman Empire. His emphasis on secularism was one of the reasons that Turkey aligned itself with Western powers during the interwar years, even though the country maintained a degree of independence from Western influence. The legacy of Ataturk. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's leadership was transformative. His sweeping reforms reshaped Turkey into a modern, secular, and unified nation-state, and his legacy is deeply embedded in the identity of the Turkish Republic. Ataturk's vision for Turkey as a secular, democratic, and nationalist state remains the foundation of Turkish political life to this day. His leadership brought Turkey into the 20th century and set it on a path toward modernization and industrialization. Ataturk's reforms also left a deep impact on Turkish society. The country's education system, economy, and legal framework all bear the marks of Ataturk's influence. His vision of secularism, modernity, and national pride has become ingrained in the collective consciousness of the Turkish people. While Ataturk's policies have been subject to criticism and debate, particularly regarding their authoritarian aspects, his legacy remains overwhelmingly positive in Turkey. He is revered as the father of the modern Turkish state, and his image is prominently displayed in government buildings, schools, and public spaces across the country. The principles of Kemalism, his ideological framework, continue to shape Turkish politics, even as Turkey grapples with the challenges of the 21st century. Turkey in the modern era: challenges, successes, and the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. In the decades following Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's death in 1938, Turkey has faced numerous challenges, both domestic and international. Yet, despite the hurdles, the nation has made significant strides in its journey as a modern republic. From a largely agrarian society to an increasingly industrialized nation, Turkey's evolution is a reflection of its early reforms and its ongoing efforts to reconcile the legacy of the Ottoman Empire with the demands of the 21st century. Economic transformation, industrialization, and growth. Under Ataturk, Turkey initiated a wave of state-led industrialization, but the country's true economic transformation came after his death. as successive leaders built on his foundations. Following World War II, Turkey shifted towards a more market-driven economy, opening the doors to private enterprise and foreign investment. This period of economic liberalization saw Turkey's industrial base expand, with manufacturing becoming a critical component of the economy. The 1980s marked a pivotal moment in Turkey's economic history under the leadership of Turgut Özal, who pushed for an export-oriented growth model and sought to integrate Turkey more closely into the global market. Özal's policies led to significant economic growth, and during the 1990s, Turkey began to emerge as one of the most dynamic economies in the region. However, the country also faced periods of instability, including high inflation, financial crises, and political turbulence. In the early 2000s, Turkey's economy continued to grow under the leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Justice and Development Party, AKP. The country achieved impressive economic gains, including improved infrastructure, rising foreign investment, and an expanding middle class. Turkey's economy became increasingly integrated with the global market, with a strong export sector and a burgeoning tourism industry. By the 2010s, Turkey had become one of the world's emerging markets, often referred to as a newly industrialized country. However, challenges remained. The country faced increasing political polarization, tensions over the role of Islam in government, and controversies over human rights and freedom of expression. Despite these challenges, Turkey remains a key player in both regional and global politics, balancing its Ottoman past with its aspirations as a modern, democratic nation. Political landscape: secularism versus Islamism. One of the most significant challenges in modern Turkey has been the ongoing tension between secularism and the growing influence of political Islam. Ataturk's secular vision remains a cornerstone of the Turkish Republic, but in recent decades, the balance between secularism and Islamism has been a contentious issue. Under the leadership of the AKP and Erdogan, Turkey saw a significant shift towards a more prominent role for Islam in political life. Erdogan's government has implemented policies that align more closely with Islamic values, such as promoting religious education, increasing the presence of religion in public life, and limiting the powers of secular institutions. His government has also been associated with cracking down on opposition, restricting press freedoms, and curbing the independence of the judiciary, which has sparked criticism both domestically and internationally. While Erdogan and the AKP have found significant support among Turkey's conservative Muslim population, their policies have also alienated secularists, liberals, and pro-Western factions of Turkish society. The tension between secularism and Islamism has resulted in political polarization, with protests and demonstrations becoming increasingly common in response to the government's policies. This tension has often manifested in debates over Turkey's identity, its relationship with the West, and its future direction. In recent years, Erdogan's increasingly authoritarian style of governance has sparked concerns about the erosion of democratic institutions in Turkey. While the country remains a key member of NATO and has pursued EU membership, its political trajectory is now more uncertain than ever. Turkey's struggle to maintain Ataturk's vision of a secular democracy while balancing the desires of a deeply religious population is one of the defining challenges of the modern Turkish state. Foreign policy: a strategic balancing act. Turkey's foreign policy, shaped by its Ottoman legacy, continues to be a balancing act between regional and global powers. Throughout the 20th century, Turkey aligned itself with Western powers, particularly the United States and NATO, while trying to maintain good relations with its neighbors, including Russia and the Middle Eastern states. In recent years, however, Turkey has sought a more independent foreign policy. Under Erdogan, Turkey has pursued a more assertive role in the Middle East, becoming involved in conflicts such as the Syrian civil war and the war against ISIS. At the same time, Turkey has forged closer ties with Russia, particularly in defense cooperation, despite being a NATO member. These shifts have led to questions about Turkey's future role in the Western alliance and its strategic interests in the region. Turkey's relationship with the European Union has also been a source of tension. While Turkey has sought EU membership for decades, progress has stalled due to disagreements over issues such as human rights, democracy, and Turkey's role in the broader European geopolitical landscape. Despite the economic benefits that EU membership could bring, Turkey's foreign policy is increasingly independent, and its alliances are becoming more fluid and complex. In the Middle East, Turkey's relationship with its neighbors remains fraught with tensions, particularly with Greece, Cyprus, and the Kurdish groups in the region. The long-standing issue of Kurdish separatism remains unresolved, and Turkey's military interventions in northern Syria have added another layer of complexity to its foreign policy. Despite this, Turkey remains a critical player in the region, serving as both a bridge between Europe and Asia and as a counterbalance to regional powers like Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Ottoman legacy, a double-edged sword. The Ottoman Empire's legacy continues to have a profound impact on Turkey today, both in terms of its national identity and its role in regional politics. On the one hand, the Ottoman Empire represents a rich cultural and historical heritage that is celebrated by many Turks. The empire's legacy can be seen in Turkey's art, architecture, cuisine, and traditions. Ataturk's decision to draw on Turkey's Ottoman heritage, while modernizing and secularizing the nation, helped to forge a unique national identity that combines elements of both its Ottoman past and its republican future. On the other hand, the Ottoman legacy can also be a source of tension. The decline and eventual collapse of the empire left a fractured region, with lingering conflicts and unresolved territorial disputes that continue to shape Turkey's foreign policy. The imperial past is also associated with the challenges of managing a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state, a problem that has continued in modern Turkey, particularly with regard to the Kurdish issue. Turkey's Ottoman heritage is particularly relevant when it comes to its relationship with the Middle East. While Ataturk sought to distance the new republic from the imperial past, Turkey's influence in the region remains tied to the historical Ottoman connection. Today, Turkey is often seen as a regional power with a strong military presence and a key player in shaping the future of the Middle East. The Ottoman legacy, then, remains both a source of pride and a reminder of the complexities of Turkey's historical and geopolitical challenges. Conclusion: the enduring influence of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, despite its eventual collapse, left a lasting imprint on the world. Its political, military, cultural, and economic legacies continue to influence the modern Middle East, Europe, and beyond. The birth of the Turkish Republic and its transformation into a modern, secular state marked a new chapter in Turkey's history, but the shadows of the Ottoman past continue to loom large. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's vision for Turkey was one of modernization, secularism, and nationalism, a vision that helped to transform the remnants of the Ottoman Empire into a modern nation-state. However, Turkey's journey in the 21st century has been shaped by ongoing debates over secularism, democracy, and national identity. As Turkey navigates the complexities of its Ottoman heritage and its role in the contemporary world, the legacy of the empire remains both a guiding force and a challenge for the modern Turkish state. The story of the Ottoman Empire is one of triumph, decline, and transformation, an epic tale that shaped the course of history and continues to influence the world today. From the heights of empire to the rise of a republic, Turkey's story is inseparable from the Ottoman legacy. The journey from empire to nation-state, from past to future, remains one of the most fascinating and complex narratives in the annals of history. From the fall of the Ottoman Empire to the birth of modern Turkey, the story of this once mighty empire is far from over. Its legacy continues to resonate across the borders of history, influencing cultures, politics, and global power dynamics. As Turkey navigates the challenges of the 21st century, the echoes of the Ottoman past still shape its present and future. But the story is not just about the empire that was. It's about the nation that rose from its ashes. A new republic, born out of revolution and vision, still grappling with the complex heritage of its Ottoman roots. The Ottoman Empire may have fallen, but its imprint remains eternal. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you've been captivated by the untold history of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of modern Turkey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with others. The past may be gone, but it's never too far from the present. Until next time, we invite you to keep exploring the echoes of history.